How many people in the room? Sorry. How many people in the room saw an earlier iteration of product diagramming or product schema that ACORD has basically been under development? I think we shelved it about a year and a half ago. Has anybody in the room seen that, experienced it? One person in the back. How many people in the room have any experience with IBM's product diagram, product modeling concept in which this was an original contribution? Okay, just a couple. I don't have a lot of slides. I don't have anything in here actually to talk about product diagramming itself, so I'm going to give it just a very brief introduction. Product diagramming does for your product modeling, for the description and the sharing of your products, as UML does for coding your program. It is a visual representation of what my product is, the rules associated with it, how it's structured, and how it's represented internally to my organization. On top of that, product diagramming supports quite a bit more metadata. In fact, ACORD did a product schema initiative, which we're not here to talk about today, but the product schema initiative physicalizes that into an XML document that allows you to exchange that information internally, which opens the door for automation and quite a bit more. But if we put that in a parking lot at the moment, it's still a very valuable tool just in terms of being able to represent your product, exchange it internally, discuss it with your business analysts, with your underwriters, with your actuaries, and being able to guide your product through its process. In fact, at one point in here, I'm going to have Cincinnati Financial. They're talking about their value of product diagramming, so you're going to understand it a little more clearly, at least from the value side, if not from the physical implementation and how you use it side. But at the highest level, that's what it is. It's a way of visually representing your products. Just to understand that it's a very specific, concrete representation that is meant to be highly normalized and very normative, very almost executable, if you will. In fact, in the IBM implementation, they were able to do something called a spec actual from that. And again, we're not talking about that today, but that is the direction of this sort of technique. That's what it enables. So enough about that. I apologize, unprepared in that regard. We probably should have put 10 minutes in here on that. If you'd like, Shane can speak to it. But he'd be much more prepared for that than me. Anyway, I'm Cliff Chaney, Senior Architect at ACORD, primarily responsible for ACORD's framework. I've brought with me my two, Traci and Alyce, here from Cincinnati Financial, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Traci Stanford. I work at Cincinnati Insurance Company. My role there is I manage a group of about 56 VAs. We have a legacy system for our commercial lines department that is both continuing to build out on the product side, and then there's also a service element of that particular system. And so we're going to talk a little bit about how we collaborated with ACORD on this diagramming technique and some of the value it brought to my department and to our system or platform as a whole.
Hi, my name is Alyce Neperud, and I also work with Cincinnati Insurance Companies. I partner up with Traci. I am focused more on what are the techniques and standards we use as BAs and helping develop the BAs in our organization. So when we're looking at maybe adopting new approaches that might help us in our organization, that's one of the things that I look at.
Excellent. So hopefully this was spelled out clearly in the description of this session, but I'll just briefly go through it here again. Some time ago, Cincinnati Financial approached ACORD with a problem. They said, you know this thing that you started, that product diagram, your product schema, those two project initiatives that you started some time ago, we have a need. We really need to use that. We really need to start using it yesterday. In fact, actually, we started to use it. I think you'd actually already put some diagrams in place. And we'd like to use it in our organization today. But as we do it, as we've already started, There's some inherent problems, some inherent weaknesses that we've seen, some challenges that we'd like to address. And while as we address those, we'd like to address those with ACORD so that what we end up with is a common standard and something that benefits both sides of us. So this is a little bit of a story of how that progressed and how we work together to achieve where the product diagram exists today. So I'll let Cincinnati Financial start with what their goals were when they came to us with this problem.
So I think for you to really,
Is she on there?
so for you to really appreciate the real value add statement, I have to tell you a little bit about the story about my team and where we were coming from. So about a year ago, we were housed actually within the commercial lines business area and did the BA work for them on this legacy system. So one of the problems that we experienced on our team is because we had a mature system, when we started to develop new things, we did more of a bottom-up approach, meaning we started with what we knew, the common language between, we struggled with where the common language is, right? The business talks in one way and the IT area talks in another way. I think anybody who's in this room probably can appreciate that problem. And so where we found to bridge the gap seemed to be talking more about screens. That was the common language that both the users and the IT people could relate to. But the problem with that is it was very bottom up. So when we get this new project or we have this new development, we'd start trying to shove all these things on the screens and say, where do they fit, right? And we were introducing design way too early in the process than where it should be. But again, we were struggling to find that common language that everybody could understand. And this technique, this diagramming technique, really helps bridge that gap. Probably executing the technique is a little more difficult than just reading the technique. And we saw immediate results with this, finding that common language where people could take a peek at these diagrams and really understand what the product meant. And it really kept us from trying to fit pieces and parts in places where they didn't belong, because we started looking at it from what is the product and how do all the pieces relate, rather than what screen can we stick this on and where does it make sense. So the value add for us is that it was a common language that was very quick to learn for everybody. It was a way to help the BAs really get in there and analyze the product appropriately rather than just going at it from more of a design standpoint. And it really bridged that gap for us, and we are pretty confident, we're new in this yet, but we're pretty confident that it's going to speed up time to market significantly.
I just want to add a little bit, just to give a little context. We're just talking here about the product diagramming, so that's a very specific part of what the BAs deliver in terms of the whole package. Obviously, there's the processes and there's data, and how does all that come together? So really we're focused on the product diagramming, but we had to really think about how it fits with all those other pieces, which seems to be part of the story here with ACORD and the whole framework as well.
And as a side effort, this may have been only for the more technical or the IT people that were in the room, one of the goals that they brought to us was they'd like to be able to do this in a reusable fashion, so that they designed a product and then there were components of that product that were reused in another product. They'd be able to reuse those product diagramming components directly. ACORD's goals were a lot simpler. Number one goal was to be able to support Cincinnati Insurance and their needs. Quite frankly, if somebody comes to me with a need, that's my number one goal, is to make sure that our standard or our standards, whatever they may be, the framework, product diagramming, et cetera, supports your needs. Obviously, though, I needed, from a higher level, I need to keep what's original goals, which is a business-friendly visual representation. And one of the things that you're going to see as a kind of a reoccurring theme here is provide the correct level of abstraction. We went back and forth between should we have 7 shapes, should we have 14, should we have 3? I could do this whole thing in 2 shapes in a line, that sort of thing. But we wanted to make sure that whatever we enabled allowed the product diagramming technique to scale to the individual company's levels of abstraction. It also needed to provide ultimate model accuracy. There's no sense in putting together something that allows you to connect anything to anything, that allows you to represent anything. Well, if I can represent anything, that doesn't necessarily mean that if I read it and you read it, that we both are interpreting it the same way. I need to make sure that the diagrams that we put together tell a story. You don't have to necessarily use the shapes exactly the same way. So my picture of my product might look different than your picture of my product. But if we both read those pictures, I know exactly what you're trying to say, and you read my picture, you know exactly what I'm trying to say. And that's what gets to provide a consistent interpretation. Also, as we went through this, we realized that there's a big need for company extensibility. That the product diagramming technique that we put in place needs to be able to be extensible. We cannot be all things to all people. And this also, by the way, helped us with the level of abstraction. We need to make sure that your information that may not be needed by the industry at large is representable on the diagram itself. And lastly, but certainly not least important, is I needed to make sure that this had direct alignment to the framework. My goal here is that every shape that you put on a product diagram, I can represent ostensibly, practically anyway, as something as an instance diagramming from the product specification in the ACORD framework. That's going to give us direct alignment between the product diagramming and the product specification in the framework. So this is an overview of the initial shapes that we had in our product diagramming, initial concepts that we could represent. Most of these came directly from IBM's contribution to ACORD. As you can see, we have this thing called a product component, or sometimes referred to as a marketable product. We dropped marketable from that because it's not always something that you necessarily market. A coverage component uses the same shape, but is in blue instead of pink. And that's going down to the specific coverage or rider or level of coverage, type of coverage provided. Rule spec is the ability to express rules. Request spec is a little out of scope for this session, so I'm just going to skip right over it. It's a way of modeling something like an arrangement change request, that sort of thing. Or I'm sorry, like a fund transfer request. Role spec, being able to express people's roles on contracts. Attribute spec, or sometimes called property spec, to be able to express the fundamental data that's associated with the coverage or a product or a rule, etc. Calculations, and finally this concept called a constant. My goal isn't to go into each and every one of these in terms of the definition and their use. That would be a completely different hour-long session on how to do product diagram. So I apologize if that was your expectation here. Please see me afterwards, and I'd be happy to talk about this, and we may even have some videos laying around from earlier sessions that Chaney has done. So here's a little bit of a diagram snippet that we started with. I've cleansed the names, but this is pretty similar to some of the diagrams that I got from Cincinnati Financial. Where we have the concept of a product here, I'm calling it the Acme Prime product, and with a rule hanging on it, off of it, the commercial property or general liability must exist. So you have to have one of these two product components if you select this product. The product component of commercial property further decomposes into a subject of insurance, and then I put off of that a specific coverage with a limit and a calculation of how they got to that coverage limit. So we haven't gone through a formal training on this, but hopefully everybody in the room already, with the limited explanation I gave, can already start to read this diagram. I see I have my product, and I can have 0 to 1 product commercial property or 0 to 1 general liability product. Off of that, I have to have, if I select this, I have to have this subject of insurance, which must have 1 or more coverages, and there's the actual limit property and a calculation for coverage limit. So this is essentially the shapes that we started with, plus one other that we're going to talk about, forms that was already in use of on the initial diagram. So I'll let you speak to the process you went through on getting here from there.
So where we started with this is we took a few coverages or that we were already familiar with in our legacy system. And we took a small and a medium and a large effort, and we tried to diagram based on some notes that we got from ACORD and apply those principles. And as we would come up to something we wasn't quite sure how to handle, that's where we would save it up and do these collaboration sessions with our ACORD partners. At that time, we would pull in our architects and our dev lead, and we would all sit down and go over these particular diagrams that we came up with, and we discussed the problems, talk about, oh, would you really do it this way versus that way, and what was the pros and cons of each one. And so over, I don't know, probably course of 4 of those meetings or so as a whole, we started to iron out some of the different paradigms. And then we actually took it and applied it to the project that was in scope for this particular effort, and took all those lessons learned and diagrammed for an actual project that we were doing. We've refined it iteratively, and we still continue to come up with new scenarios every once in a while where you're not quite sure which way to go. But I can't tell you the value add that we can quickly already see. The conversations when we're in stakeholder meetings are tremendous now. And you saw the snippet of that one, you can quickly already start to read it. We had that same experience in one of our review sessions, and it was with an executive. So they're not even down in the weeds of the product, right? And they're in there just hearing about our diagramming technique, and we brought one up. And this particular executive said to us, "Where's my dart code?" That's exactly what we're hoping to get out of this whole technique, right? Very early on in the process, before you've even turned over your requirements, when you're talking to your stakeholders, you're finding out where your holes are, where your gaps are, where you have the wrong relationships, right? Everybody knows finding it early in the process is so beneficial. So within the first few weeks of this refined practice, where we were just showing them a rough draft of what we had, we already saw the benefits start to play out for us. So it was tremendous.
Actually, Cliff, I could talk just a little bit about the iterative process. It actually was very interesting. I think when we first started to use the technique, we thought, oh, we'll just do it, it'll be done, it's cool. But what we found is we really had a lot of questions, and we thought, okay, we'll just ask the court and they'll have all the answers for us. And turns out they said, oh, those are really good questions. Those are some of the same questions that we've been asking as well, but we need the real practical hands-on experience from other insurers to kind of help us figure out what direction we're going to take here. So, as Traci said, we would come up with all our issues, and we would do as many coverages and diagrams as we could to help explain it. And then we'd sit down and we'd actually go through it issue by issue and try to come with some sort of solution. And again, the 4 meetings, it probably happened over a course of even like 6 months or something. It was a pretty long period of time where you kind of had to have some time to work with it and really figure out how is this best going to work to show our product, and then actually meet with our other stakeholders, meet with people from business and from with our architects to say, do you understand what we're trying to do here? What can you add to this?
And I'd like to add that there's nothing magic about this, and it's something that it's not a service that I offered specifically or specially to Cincinnati Financial because they had some special relationship to me. This sort of thing is open to all of you. As ACORD members, this is one of the most underrated member benefits, in my opinion, of being a member of ACORD, is the ability to have this sort of discussions, to have this sort of iterative development. We benefit because we get it with a much better standard, much better product in this case. You benefit because you know what we're developing goes in the direction that you need it to go.
It was very cool to be able to sit in a room with Cliff, Mark, and Chaney and try to work through some of these, because we really did feel like partners in the process. We put this slide together because we wanted to give you some hint at what are some of the complexities that we came across and what helped kind of drive some of the direction we went in. And then Cliff's going to go into some of the very specific solutions that came out.
Product schema, which would essentially be a duplication of the product modeling diagram, product specification that you see in the life and annuity spec. No such animal exists in any of our other standards. So the goal, even at that point, was to provide a translation between that and the actual product specification in the life and annuity XML. So, I will add, I cannot name any names. If they were in the room, they probably would be raising their hand. But I can tell you I've talked to 2 different vendors already that do product modeling and who are very interested in implementing this directly.
Cliff, I have a question for you. Are you talking about like where you would have a product diagramming tool where you could still have the limited complexity within the visual model, but have a means by providing some of the details so that you could?
Precisely.
Yeah.
So as you drag a shape onto the screen, for example, this is the way things work in UML modeling tools today.
Right.
So I drag a class onto the screen. And there is always this trade-off. How many attributes do I show? Do I show all the stereotypes? You know, how much data do I actually show on the diagram versus what's actually in the underlying model? So it's the same sort of complexity that you wrestle with. But as I drag a shape onto the screen, up pops a dialog box with maybe 30 or 100 different slots of fields of information to fill out to do further definition.
Right.
Which is all you're tracking in Word documents right now. But so you want something to be able to generate a Word document or generate a much more readable thing from that. So that is what I'm talking about.
I'm assuming you still have to think about it in an iterative fashion in the sense that we're still thinking about it as like we want to have like a concept model. We're working out how the product works. We're not worried about all the details yet.
Precisely.
The details come iteratively as we work through it.
Precisely, and so that's where you try to serve a little bit of 2 masters, but there's no reason why it shouldn't work. You don't have to fill in those details. So I drag the components on, I drag the shapes on. I may never fill in the shapes, I may only use it at the level that you're on, and that's what we're talking about today. But the alignment, the question specifically around why am I concerned about lines of the information model, is about enabling, not requiring, but enabling to take it to those next levels. So, how are we doing on time here? We're doing pretty good. Most of these technical ones I can breeze through anyway. Some of the immediate changes that we made as soon as this got revised was I removed the word spec. Before you had a rule spec, a calculation spec, a coverage spec, an attribute spec, or a property spec, etc. That doesn't really help in the business interpretation of my product. This is a diagram of my product. Plus, quite frankly, even in Cincinnati Financial's implementation, they never carried the word through either. Their label would say product and give the name of the product, and coverage and the name of the coverage, and calculation and the calculation rule. So they had already naturally dropped the word spec. I dropped the word spec from our official definitions. If you look at some of the initial shapes, many of them depended on color. I immediately dropped that dependence, that there should not be a color dependence in the diagram. If you want to use color because it further adds to the visualization, that's great. But we can't have 2 shapes vary in their meaning only because they were represented in 2 different colors. And that required us to add an additional shape or 2 in order to make that work. So here's some of, in order to implement both of those, here are some of the changes we immediately saw. We came up with a new shape for the concept of a product. We kept the coverage shape, and ostensibly I could have went either way. I could have kept the product shape and came up with a new shape for coverage. Quite frankly, if you looked at the diagrams, this is where just practicality came into play. If you look at the diagrams that I was working with, I might have 300 coverage shapes on the various sets of pages that diagrams I'm looking at, and 3 or 4 products were represented in the product component. So everything else was represented as coverage with that. And then in both of these, they had they were a little bit ambiguous. Were you really doing the coverage or just a component of the coverage? Were you really doing a product or a component of the product? So we decided that we really needed a shape to just call out the concept of a structural component. It's neither a coverage nor a product, it's just a structural component. And interestingly, we'd already had this concept in the information model as well, and it worked really nicely to start using it here.
We found, just to kind of build on what Cliff said there, we found that in diagramming some of our coverages and products, there was more than just the simple hierarchy of product coverage. We wanted to be able to group products. We wanted to be able to have things like a line of business that grouped coverages. We wanted to have coverage options, coverage, things that would be, whether it was like something higher level than a coverage or lower level, like a sub-coverage. We had different coverage options that we had to explore how we wanted to present those. So we found that it was essential in our case that we wanted to be able to differentiate between the product and the coverage, but also differentiate between these structural shapes and really call out the name of them. If we just started having these generic shapes and it said structure, it had to be as meaningful as possible. So we came up with particular types of structural shapes because, again, the word structure in and of itself didn't say much to the business. What is it? It's either a line of business or, I'm trying to think of what else we used it for, structures, things like building.
Subject of insurance was another one.
Right, so subject of insurance, we came up with the names that had meaning to the business. So things like a location or building, place of insurance, subject of insurance, things that really had more business meaning. So having more of a product hierarchy was important to us, and that was really where a lot of the issues came in, I would have to say, is how to get that hierarchy right, and the debate around, well, what is a true coverage versus the product, and what's an option versus a coverage, how do you want those things represented? There was a lot of discussion in this area.
And interestingly, this is where, again, product diagramming was already starting to influence and will continue to influence the development of the information model. So the information model right now has a class structural component. And it is meant to be used for something like, I'm not sure about a specific line of business, but subject of insurance is one that we've been talking about, having used it in even some of our own instance diagrams. But this concept of once I get in touch with the business user, saying, well, really, for us, we need subject of insurance in line of business and product group. And so immediately my mind goes to, we need type codes or subclasses on structural component to be able to say, this type of structural component is a line of business or it is a product group. And those are the sorts of things where the information model is going to benefit. And quite frankly, we haven't even carried those conversations back to Cincinnati Financial, because our entire view with them is a discussion of product diagramming. But it makes sense to me that if this is how you're diagramming your products, this is how the business looks at it, the information model should start mirroring that and reflecting it, because then it would be natural to build these in OID or somewhere traditionally going on. So another thing that came out and littered through the diagrams from CFC, maybe that's over exaggeration, I apologize if so, was this concept of a form that continued to appear on the original shapes and the original diagrams that they were generously shared with me. And so other than the fact that it was using essentially the attribute spec shape with a color, as distinguishing was immediately a problem, it brought out to me that, hey, this is an important concept to Cincinnati Financial, that, hey, they need to be able to draw this form spec. Do you want to speak to the importance of the form shape?
Sure, just a little bit. Historically, in our VA practice, there were people that worked with coverage requirements and people that worried about forms. And really what we needed to do is have those in closer sync with each other, because really the product ultimately is an agreement which is loaded up with these forms. So We felt that just in terms of the way that we speak with the business, and they also think about the forms, and when we look at all our documentation about products, it speaks about the forms. So it really helped in discussing coverages, products, to show, and we're not showing all the forms, that would be a nightmare, but what we're talking about is coverage, coverage-wide forms, deck pages, ones that really speak to us by saying, here's the level at which we differentiate. Like we had an example where we have a different deck page if it's occurrence versus claims made. Well, that was important to us, so we felt that that needed to be expressed in the diagram. So it was also helping us to pull together to make sure that we had our information in sync, because a lot of times forms, we have to feed some of the data that we're representing at that level onto the form, so it was kind of double checked to make sure that we had what we needed to support that form.
And so this is a good example of sort of push-pull relationship that ACORD gets into, and I'm trying to balance the needs of a member customer with the needs of ACORD. So internally, we had quite a length of debates and discussions on what to do with this, whether we should move forward with this request or not. On the one hand, you could say, well, that's just another structural component, isn't it? Let's just use that and not add to the shapes. So our goal is we don't want to make every business concept that somebody brings to us become its own unique shape. So it is kind of a balance where we don't want to dilute this to the point where we have very unique shapes for every single potential concept. But at the end of the day, we did realize this had broad industry applicability, and that it wasn't line of business specific. This isn't something that just property and casualty was going to be interested in, or just life or reinsurance. This was going to apply to everybody. You may be interested. Of course, you don't have to use it. You don't want to model the forms with specifics on attachments. Don't, or use a structural shape component if you want. So, but it was obviously an existing need. It was certainly obviously an existing need for Cincinnati Financial. And just our experience working with other companies, we realized this was going to be unique for them. Again, to fit in with our underlying rules where we didn't want shapes dependent upon colors, I needed a new shape because they were reusing the attribute shape with a different color. And so we just prefer the more familiar days gone by. I don't know if anybody still does flow charting these days, but the original flow charting printed report or form shape became used here. Another issue that we dealt with Cincinnati Financial was this concept of putting a rule spec to be able to specify a very common situation. I'm not even sure that this was specifically one of your rules. I believe it was. It certainly wasn't with these names, but a very common situation is structurally, I have 0 to 1 or 0 to many associations here with these components or these coverages under the product. But we have a rule that says you must have one or the other. The product doesn't exist, it isn't good to me unless you can specify this component or this coverage or this component or this coverage. So we had this situation of a choice come up, and it came up in several situations. And this is the way the product diagramming, as it started, would have handled that situation. It would have structurally said 0 to 1, with a rule up here saying that the commercial property or general liability must exist. That's how you represent it. The problem with that is these clauses here didn't feel very accurate. They're certainly not accurate in absence of the rule themselves. There's no real visual representation that really what's going on here is a choice. That really what's going on here is an either-or sort of situation. And it really limits the reusability of the product definition. This rule is more tied to the product's choice here than it is tied to the specific product. So if I wanted to reuse these components and add its corresponding choice in another product, I'd have no way to do it except to copy shapes and copy rules and make sure I do it, handle it in that manner. So what we came up with is, what we really needed was a choice shape. So we used the diamond here, and I understand that this, by the way, is reusing the current diamond of a roll shape for those of you that may know IAA or remember the original specification. I'll get to that in a second. It immediately eliminated the need for rule text. So if we look at the previous one where I had to specify this in rule, this is now visually represented. I don't need that text anymore to visually see, oh, I have a choice once I understand the shape anymore. I have a choice to make, and I must choose one of these two. It provides a handle for other rules or calculations, so if I wanted to have some sort of additional rule on here about the choice, you have to choose both of them or something along those lines, you can have it there. And again, I used more traditional, days gone by, flow charting choice construct to be able to represent that. That brought us up to a problem. It reused the roll shape. We were originally using a roll for that. So this is where I reluctantly strayed from the IBM IA's diagramming, and I do say reluctantly. I, as much as possible, I'd like to stick to the IBM IAA modeling because it'll be familiar to people that have used that in the past. So in this instance, I stuck with something that was as close as possible. I took the diamond shape and turned it on its edge. So it's still a diamond, it's just on its edge now. I understand that's still visually different, but it should be an easier transition for people to IAA. And practically, it immediately worked better with text. So if I wanted to express that role or information about the role in this diamond, you actually have very little space here, 1 or 2 lines of text, where the diamond has to become extremely large. This, as a practical matter, became a lot easier to use in our diagram out of the box. Another one that we came across, and this one again goes back to the level of abstraction and how much detail you want to put in there, was the concept of a coverage limit. And I use this as only one example. I'm sure we could come up with a dozen if we sat and talked. We came up with about half a dozen immediately in our initial discussion. The concept of, for example, a coverage limit or minimum premium. In property casualty context, the limit or the premium is generally thought of as a simple attribute on the property, on the coverage. What's the limit? What's the minimum premium? Or what's the base premium? There might be a calculation involved, but it's generally assumed to be one particular attribute that I can specify very nicely as a traditional property or attribute, an A-value pair, if you will. But if you factor in life and annuity, the concept of a limit is much more complex. I can't express my limit as a simple attribute or a simple property. My limit is expressed in an amount per a period of time. It might be $10,000 a year, or $1,000 a month, or $10,000 a year. That might be my limit. So the $10,000 and the yearly part needed to be combined together. And again, which violates it being some sort of simple property or attribute on it. We went back and forth on this one quite a bit. This one was quite a good level of discussion. And what we landed on was this new concept that technically is labeled as a feature that comes in from the information model. You'll see it there. That met our needs of being able to express a more complex concept, but it wasn't actually an attribute, it was a feature. It gave us a cross line of support because it supports property and casualty and life and annuity. Quite honestly, and I put this bullet, they've reviewed it, they had to have it fed back. Cincinnati Financial wasn't entirely happy with this solution. They don't like the concept of a limit being expressed as something different than an attribute. A limit is an attribute to them. But this shape is close enough, at least, that we felt that we'd be able to, it wouldn't visually upset anybody to display a difference. That said, they did loved it, in fact, for the use of calculations. If you look back here, actually, I think I put it on the next slide. Okay. Anyway, a very common scenario was to have a shape for the attribute, coverage limit, and then a shape for the calculation, a circle off for the limit calculation. And this would repeat throughout the diagramming, used over and over again. Here's the attribute, and then here's the calculation associated with it. So it was decided to reuse the same concept to combine, so it's back the idea of a heavy attribute sort of thing. It's more than just a number. I need to combine the calculation with it as well, metadata, if you will. And we combined it into this concept of a feature. Did you have any comment or anything on that so far?
No, I think you got it.
Okay. So it's been a recurring thing, mentioned a couple of times, and this is something that we struggled with at Alyce for this need for customization. And it was, as they alluded to, a problem that they expressed or had internally at Cincinnati Financial, how much detail do we put on the diagram versus what's going to be useful and readable? How detailed do I make it so that my IT people are happy versus what's going to make my senior manager happy and be able to really understand how this product is working and if everything's accounted for, what's our progress on it, et cetera, et cetera. So moving forward, I've already covered this. Join this. We need your input. We need your feedback. It's going to happen. Just you get to decide on how much it's going to reflect your desires. Any other questions? Okay.
So as those of you that know me will know, I'm really excited about what I heard here today. I'm especially excited by the formation of this reformation, I should say, of the product modeling group, and we'll definitely be there in full force to help out. I do have a concern, which from what you're doing here, and it's not a concern with the quality of what you've been doing, but a concern about perhaps it came too little too late. And that is that I don't know what kind of tooling you're using in managing these diagrams of yours. The technology has moved way beyond using Visio diagrams and so on. We today have sophisticated tools with which we can manage models like that, with which we can manage the reusability of all or part of a particular product, and you know, a whole suite of tools. And it's not from my company, so I'm not advertising.
Right.
But you know, we work closely with the vendors who are developing these things, and I'm concerned that if we start changing a whole lot of concepts from ACORD, that you're going to introduce a whole bunch of retooling, which may be appropriate for these guys, but sooner is better than later. You know, before either you or they or any others go too far down the line, you know, let's get our ducks in a row, as we say.
Absolutely, and ACORD hears that loud and clear. We're already in contact with vendors along this. We've shared this with two members already. So I'm not going to go on record as saying they support us, but I will go on record as saying they're very interested and they want to continue to participate.
Well, as we are as well.
Excellent. So I'll be looking to my insurer members in the group to be working to come, if they can't bring their vendors to the table, to at least communicate who should be at the table to ACORD, and will take on to go out and seek them directly and get their participation.
Right, and then there's another thing for those of you that are new to this and perhaps interested or intrigued by this. We are presenting a series of 5 one-hour workshops starting, I think, 2 weeks from now, during which you can model a product, introduce it into a product policy admin situation, do new business on it, introduce claims, pay the claims, all stemming out of this little product that you've modeled. And that will be presented, as I said, in 5 one-hour sessions a week apart. So just catch me when you can.
Jim offline after the session for a follow-up on that.
Will you do that? I'll just give you my card and you can send out the details of... in fact, I'll send you an email with all the details.
Okay, excellent.
Got another quick question back this way.
We got to hurry to finish this up.
And I thank everybody. It was a long session, and I think I saw one person leave already 3 minutes after. So thank you for staying as late as you have. Coming back.
Yeah, just continuing on the theme that was introduced before. Very, very interested in the idea of product modeling, but I had concerns about the premature focus on an approach based upon what IBM did with IAA, which is where the graphical semantics come from here. And I would ask that before you continue to be overly wrapped up in that aspect and that level of detail with regard to product modeling, that you step back and think about some very concerning issues like versioning,
Sure.
like customization,
Yes.
at all sorts of levels, classes of products versus instances of products,
Agreed.
where all the different characteristics that you have as a product are represented as stereotypes, and then you've got instances of those, but maybe not all combination. I mean, I would be much more comfortable if, within a month or so, ACORD could publish a list of, here are the 7 things that are really, really challenging in this space, before a significant amount of time is committed to developing a standard that may, in fact, be too simple to withstand, like the initial confrontation, I don't want to say with the enemy, but with people who are used to
Agreed.
product situations.
Same.
Yeah, I was gonna say, and we'll finish with this, to be perfectly honest, any of you might have been on the original working group with regards to product scheme and product diagram. We ran into
Yes.
most of those issues, which is really the primary reason why this entire effort was put on hold.
Yeah.
And so what you're seeing here is the first kind of reintroduction
Right.
of that. This intent, everything that you've seen up here, is designed almost exclusively for what the folks at Cincinnati Financial were talking about trying to accomplish and overcome. There's an entirely separate technical level that plays into this, which is, what do you do from a versioning standpoint? What do you do from a publication standpoint? What do you do from a consumption standpoint with regards to product modeling and product definition, which we are not getting into yet. And I say yet very purposefully, because there is an intent that there's a whole other layer on top of what we're trying to accomplish here in order to be able to account for that. That's where and also why we have some of these solution providers that have tools out there that are chomping at the bit for us to not only, they want us to standardize on this. Give me a common set of shapes, concepts, semantics, etc. That's my first step. Now tell me how to version it. Tell me how to deal with geographical, or let's just talk here in the States, state-specific variations on our various products. You talked a lot about classes of products. It's another great example where I'm not talking about the individual thing that I published that was then you created an instance of for my policy. I'm talking about an entire suite, reusability, all those kinds of things are ones that we're actively talking about. What we're trying to accomplish here, quite honestly, was with the help of Cincinnati Financial in particular, saying, look, we can't even get this first pass, this high level, we can't get our organization in order. We can't figure out a way to bridge the gap between our programs, our technical or our design staff, or our VAs. Right? So give me a mechanism, give me a technique to accomplish that first. We'll have to deal with a whole other situation of translating the Visio or the UML, whatever it is, to screens and rating engines and so forth. There's a whole other layer there that still has to be addressed. So we're certainly aware of it, and that's actually a very good observation. There's a lot more complexity than just what we're showing here.
And I don't want to presume that I've thought of everything that you've thought of. Will just say that versioning, for example, instances from a master to product design, if you will, state-specific variations, et cetera, as alluded there, are things that we have already started discussions on, that we have already put on our, again, not in Cincinnati Financial because they haven't brought it to as a problem with us, but we have already started behind the scenes, as well as one, for example, one of the vendors that I'm talking to doesn't use unique shapes for all these concepts. They take a more traditional approach where they want to put stereotypes on UML classes or instances. And I'm already in discussions with them that we should support that. So let's name the stereotypes to match the product, what we have here, and let's work through those issues as well. So I don't want to presuppose or sound like this is the only implementation that I see this heading. We want to make sure we're meeting those needs as well. And please, the community, we should be stood up by next week. Come to ACORD.org under framework and look for that community. Join it, if only to give me the list of the 7 things you think are going to kill this. That'd be awesome. Once again, thank you very much, guys. I'm surprised at the level of attendance that this has generated and the level of interest. I'm very excited about it, and hopefully sharing that as well.